Well, good morning, everybody. I was just sitting here thinking this morning about the way that people are going to remember 2023 in terms of weather. And the map you're looking at here just shows you the last week's worth of precipitation. Remember, we saw incredibly heavy rain came out of Colorado into parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, the flooding that hit right around here around Mayfield, Kentucky. We saw a tornado last week, a big one that did a lot of damage in North Carolina. We had flooding rains earlier in the month that were up here in parts of New England, just truly epic flooding. We had a drought in the Midwest, followed by heavy rains in the Midwest. We've had a derecho. We've had a tremendous amount of hail. We've had extreme heat in Texas and Oklahoma that moved into the... I mean, this is just going to be a year remembered for a lot of really highly anomalous weather. And we haven't even gotten to the hurricane season or even a discussion about where we think this El Nino could go. So it just has me thinking a lot about those things, and especially about where we've seen a lot of this severe weather. So I want to show you a couple of graphics here. These come from the Storm Prediction Center. And what we're looking at here is wind reports. So in terms of severe winds, we are well above average this year on severe wind damage. And of course, a lot of this has come from multiple large complexes of storms, not just in the central United States, but I mean, we've had them all the way to the East Coast. In terms of tornado reports, we're still above trend as well. So you can see here that the trend line run right through the middle of the graphic here, and this is where we currently sit at 1,118 reports through this point in the month of July. But I think I'll remember the hail a lot this year. It just feels as though we've seen a tremendous amount of hail damage throughout the midsection of the country. And as you can see here, we're more than 500 reports, or almost 500 reports, above the historical average. And we'll likely continue to see all three of these numbers climb as I show you where this pattern's going here in the near term. One of the fun things I wanted to do is we were talking over the weekend about when was the last time we did not have at least a slight risk in the SPC convective outlook maps. So we look at those every forecast video, right? So this is a great thing that is put out by Iowa State. This is their Mesonet site. And what I love about it is it's a calendar where it shows every day what the Storm Prediction Center was issuing in terms of the convective outlook. So it shows the highest, okay? And I want to take you over here to June the 8th, because that was that was the start of a streak of days where we had at least a slight risk. So it goes slight, enhanced, moderate, and high. Those are the categories above slight. That was beginning of a streak that just ended today. So today here, we finally no longer have, the high risk. And so, in fact, go take a look at it here. This is how things are shaping up today. Now, it doesn't mean we're not going to have strong to severe storms in places, but we don't have a large area identified today. At least early this morning, I'm recording this about 5 a.m. As to where there's going to be a slight risk. Now, there's the possibility that the Storm Prediction Center could change this and start to look for areas in through here that could have that risk. But it's just a kind of a neat little fact about weather. We love to talk about weather stats all the time, so I wanted to share that one with you. By the way, over the weekend, we did get quite a bit of hail. Again, this is just the last 3 days of maximum estimated hail size. And once again, like I said, coming out of the midsection of the country here, we can just see numerous reports of very large hail, up baseball size and larger. As you slide east, even some of the storms that rolled through the eastern half of the country here, producing some hail and, of course, some damage. Now, early this morning, I was watching a complex of storms right here, coming out of parts of Nebraska into western Iowa, and it's moving a bit farther to the south. These are severe warned, and there is a larger area of severe thunderstorm watch through early this morning. But I want to take you back to yesterday, because this is a pattern that we are going to be stuck discussing for a while. Now, if you just watch, okay, I'll just take you back into the morning, and we'll play it forward. What you see is really focused right here, this large ridge of high pressure. Now, we get clouds around this, right? Even though it's high pressure, because of the lift in the mountains, because of the heat, there's convective plumes of moisture that's popped throughout this. And so you will see some very large storms throughout the western United States. And as you look kind of around the periphery of it, we're going to start to be concerned about wildfire risk of wildfires being spread. We can even see here there is, of course, some smoke right in through this area from some of the wildfires that are in Oregon. Now, speaking of smoke, look at all of this. This is still Canadian wildfire smoke, still going through, parts of the Canadian prairie, the Midwest, the Western Plains, getting up here into the upper Midwest. And there are isolated pockets of storms that popped on this heat. In fact, there were some hailers here in my home state of Illinois yesterday. And as we went through the overnight hours, we saw multiple complexes of storms continue to build. And early this morning, I was monitoring some pretty nasty storms that were right here again in Nebraska and Iowa, pretty active on lightning. Now, one of the things you're going to hear me talk a lot about this week, and we've been discussing this, is that the flow is going to go around those ridges and come across a big section of the country out of the northwest. So I'm showing you this animation this morning just so you can get a sense of the direction of the storms we're going to be seeing. They're going to be coming, a lot of them, out of this direction over the coming days, several days, possibly even weeks. And it's all going to be about the position of this summer pattern with respect to where the ridge is going to be. And I can summarize the near-term forecast in one graphic. This is a forecast of something called the Pacific North American pattern. And if you have followed my forecast for a while, we talk about this quite a bit, especially in winter. And this is the idea here. When the Pacific North American pattern goes negative, like you're seeing right into this area, that is representative of troughing, generally along the west coast of North America or in the Gulf of Alaska. That tends to keep the western United States with a bit more unsettled weather. That tends to keep the western United States with better onshore flow and maybe better chances of getting some storms in the summer. So they're currently right now experiencing a large ridge. That's when the PNA is high. Then it dips. This is when the ridge that's over the west that I just showed you moves into the Midwest. This is the source of the heat. Now, if this stayed down here, the heat wave that's in the central United States would be on for a long time, and the west would be cooler. But what we notice here is that as we get out in the forecast time period, the very end of July, the values are pretty well represented here by the European model going back up to a positive PNA pattern. That's where the ridging backs up to the west. We start to see it redevelop across the west. It introduces heat to the west and also produces a broader trough over the Hudson Bay. And that results in a lot of northwest flow coming out of the Canadian prairie through the central United States toward the east. This is the kind of pattern that keeps the eastern United States away from extreme heat, but puts the west back in it. So everything else that I'm going to share with you until we get to the hurricane part of this talk is this. So let's go have a look at what I'm talking about. Right now, this is the large ridge we're watching develop. Now, this trough is helping to knock down the PNA, okay? But what we're going to see here is that as we play forward, that ridge, by the time we get to the middle of this week, has moved out of the west. It was here, and now it's opening up there. And this is going to introduce a lot of heat into the central United States. It kind of got knocked out by this trough that's coming through, which is going to keep the weather unsettled throughout parts of the Canadian prairie this week. But as I play through Wednesday into Thursday, this is when the heat's really going to push out of the south all the way here into the Great Lakes area. And this is going to be several days of well into the 90s and triple-digit heat at times here in the Midwest. Now, of course, to the south of that, we're going to be considerably hotter. But I'm just kind of pointing out to the most highly anomalous temperatures here. But here we are next Saturday, getting into Sunday and Monday. And what do we see? That ridge, which had opened, watch it start to move back in this direction. Watch the deepening of this trough that's here over parts of the kind of the Canadian Maritimes or Quebec over toward the Great Lakes. And playing into the next week time frame, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we now see the ridge re-engaging over the Rockies, and the flow comes over the top of it like this. Now, why we care so much about this particular flow setup is what it does to the southwest monsoon, what it does to heat and potential drought development in Texas, how it could limit some storm activity along our Gulf Coast, and then how we end up getting what we call ridge-riding storms coming over the top of this. And those ridge-riding storms happen as little short waves. I'll represent them with L's here. Come over the top of this, and they basically dive into the unstable air, which is being pulled north out of the Gulf of Mexico. And so these are very difficult to predict. The model never really hones in on them properly, but we end up developing a corridor in through here that has the potential for storms. And the problem with those storms is they're full of unstable air. There's plenty of heat at the surface, and it's pretty cold aloft. There is not a lack of moisture at this point, and therefore the storms develop as clusters, and then they tend to bow out into kind of damaging lines of storms. And that's going to be the concern as we go forward. And we're already beginning to see that. So the new streak begins. This is the day 2 on the 25th. We're going to watch the upper Midwest. We also have to watch parts of the mid-Atlantic. We get into day 3. See how that progresses? This is the 26th. We have a large slight risk over parts of the Midwest here from Iowa to Ohio, clipping parts of southern Wisconsin and Minnesota as well. Michigan, forgive me. And we're going to watch this whole setup just continue to progress going forward. Now, thinking about all of that, I want to make a case here for the models. And I don't want you to look at the exact representation of what the forecast is going to be. And what I mean is, don't look at this and assume that the model's got this exactly right, where every single storm is going to be through Wednesday and of this week. It's just more about the flow. Can you see it? I'm just playing for you through the middle of this week. Here's Monday morning. going out there until Tuesday and Wednesday. And what you're noticing is that we're just getting this ridge riding storms coming over the top, and we have a lot of isolated convective events that flow through this area. Here's our wave coming through the Canadian Prairie as well, which we can just barely see in the high-res NAM forecast. But there will be storms in that area as well. So I want to make a point here about what this particular pattern is going to set us up with. And it's maybe better represented on this map. I show you these every single time I give you a forecast video. I like them. They're a good way to kind of summarize the precipitation pattern. Now, there will be monsoonal-like storms here. This is not the full-blown monsoon that we can get. If you want to see just really wet conditions in the Four Corner States, you got to plant a big ridge of high pressure here. That'll do it. But we still have some monsoonal storms coming through. We then see where the main storm track from the jet stream will be, farther to the north. But remember, Canada, when you just think about the Canadian Prairie, and I'm just honing in on this spot, as you go north from that spot, agricultural productivity decreases. That's because we get closer and closer just to the forested area. It's not to say that we don't grow anything here, but it's important to see that the closer you get to that U.S.-Canada border, this is a very agriculture productive area. Now in through here, there's going to be storm complexes. See this? And the models are picking up on it. But Texas, parts of the southeast are going to be missing out on a lot of this. So our cotton belt could be taking a hit with this particular pattern as it sets up. I'll get to the tropics in just a few moments here, but do notice that much of the kind of the eastern side of the United States, or East Coast, I should say, will be seeing quite a bit of thunderstorm activity throughout this week. Okay, what about just an operational run from the European? Again, I want you to almost like blur your eyes and just see the flow. And you'll see these pieces coming together here. And so if we just kind of walk back and forth, you'll see this pattern over the next 7 or 8 days, how it evolves with flow coming over the mountains, right here, monsoonal storms, flow kind of diving into the Midwest like this, storms running up through parts of New England, drier south. And that's just the setup we've got for a while going forward. And as I always do, I find it most instructive to look at the probability maps. A couple things I'm concerned about here. Flooding rains into the mountains, especially into Colorado. The European ensemble really picked up on this over the weekend. Got to keep an eye out on these big mountain thunderstorms here because they can cause flash flooding very quickly. Where did we see the major increase in the probability of getting an inch? It's right in through here. Remember last week we were talking that this was probably underdone in the models. Now it's considerably higher. Models did back off on the coastal storms. They're certainly very dry south down here in Texas, but take a look kind of running over the edge as to where the wettest conditions are likely going to be forecast here. Next, what about week 2? This is what the pattern's showing up currently for week 2. We do see that the CPC went wetter for the west, coming around the ridge. We do see that the European model wetter in this area, drier farther to the south. And it's making the GFS look more correct because it's always got a dry bias down here, but you can see the overall setup of this pattern, moving forward. Onto the temperature side of this. Now, the last 23 days or 24 days of the month of July, they've looked something like this. Extremely hot in Texas. It did get very hot at times in Oklahoma. We've been very hot in the southwest and up the west coast. But when you look over the month of July, month to date, this is going to be where the biggest change is going to be. It's going to be the Midwest and the plains, and that's where that ridge is opening to right now. We can already see through early this morning where we've got the heat advisories in place, and we are expecting a whole lot more of this to open up into this area as we go throughout the rest of this week. Here's what the high temperatures look like. Here's today on Monday, going into Tuesday and Wednesday. So there's the negative PNA cooling things off in the west, really bringing in the heat into the midsection of the country. We will likely see 100-degree temperatures moving pretty far to the north here. I know the NDFD's got a lot of upper 90s, but I think we'll crack that number here. This is by Wednesday, getting into Thursday, and then through Friday. But as we suggested, if that ridge begins to retreat and it heads back to the west, there will be kind of a limit on the number of days that we'll expect to see these incredibly hot temperatures in this area. We'll likely see this back off once we get past next Sunday. So this is 5 to 7 days of a lot of excessive heat in this area. It never even turns off to the south, but 5 to 7 days of excessive heat before we start to see the pattern begin to shift around. And because of that, we are expecting evaporation rates. Look at this coming out of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, to get up there well above 2 inches. So with this heat coming through here, there's going to be some places that miss out on these storms, but get the heat. Now, I want to be very clear about something that I'm afraid I wasn't. This pattern is not a give everybody rain pattern if you're in northwest flow. We will go through the next 7 to 10 days, even in these places that have higher probabilities of getting storms, and a lot of folks will be completely missed, meaning that the heat will cause stress in those areas. But it's important to just note that this is not a completely dry pattern. We get storms out of northwest flow like this. Okay, so let's go back here. We've talked about the evaporation. Here we are. What about the temperature pattern going forward? 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. Now watch the west. You're going to see that negative PNA fade. And by the time we get out there day 5 through 10, the heat begins to build back throughout the Intermountain West. The last holdout will be the coast. Day 10 through 15, the heat spreads west according to latest model trends. And now we see less risk of excessive heat in a large section here of the country because the west is taking on the ridge again. Now, we are plowing here toward August, and that would be really the start of a major ramp up of tropical cyclone activity. And a couple things to point out here over the next 7 days. The National Hurricane Center, through the 2 a.m. update today, did kind of reduce the risk of this system developing. That's down to 20%. But overall, if we kind of look at some of the controlling factors, this is just a 10-day forecast of Saharan dust. We've been keeping an eye on this because it's very difficult for some of these early season systems to form on air that's pretty dry and dusty at times. We are getting some of the Saharan dust over parts of Texas. It's coming down here into the south as well. But the overall forecast going forward for the next 10 days, we see what's left of this system maybe getting its act together in the Caribbean, but low probability of getting into the Gulf. We're going to watch the next waves coming off of Africa. They right now appear to be making the turn to the north. We do need to watch for some coastal development here, and this is just dawn. That's what you've got going on there. But the point is just to tell you that the season's becoming more active. Now, I should have shown you this, earlier in the month. I apologize, I forgot. But Colorado State did update their 2023 hurricane forecast. And what you've got on this side of that line is average, and over here you've got their current forecast. And if there's been one thing I could say about their forecast, and I very much respect what they do, they've increased every single number, from number of named storms to hurricane days to accumulated cyclone energy. All of these numbers have increased in their most recent updates. And a lot of that has to do with ocean temperatures. But there was kind of a big question that was raised over the weekend, and I got several emails about it. And the question is, what's going on with these Atlantic Ocean temperatures? El Niño's building in the background. We're in the Pacific here, by the way. We've got a lot of warm water over the last 30 days emerging here in this part of the Pacific, but the negative Pacific meridional mode is still there firing away. But the questions are about this area right here. Watch this. Going back to the end of June and playing through the month of July so far, we've seen a major uptick in ocean temperatures here. I mean, they went from well below average to 5 to 10 degrees Celsius above average. And I got questions as to why that was happening. And all that I could tell you is I think it's just an interplay between, the coupled atmosphere and ocean system. And what you've got here is looking in the lower levels of the atmosphere in the month of July, we did park a high pressure cell sitting here. So the flow went around this, okay, and as you can see, the winds got pretty light, pretty weak into this region, meaning that we stopped the wind-driven ocean current on top and then allowed quite a bit of solar radiation, sunlight, to get through there, really cranking up those temperatures. Now, what does it mean? That's where I'm going to struggle, because it's been such a rapid transition. I'm curious as to how this is going to set up, the temperature contrast between the water temperatures here in Greenland or, the farther to the north, into this part of Canada. It could set up a very, what we would just say a highly dynamic situation with large temperature contrast, which could drive an upper level wind. And we'll need to know what that does overall to the pattern, but I need more time to think through this, so I'll keep you posted on that. Last thing I'm going to share with you is this. On Friday, we did get a new update from the CPC on their Week 3, Week 4 outlook. So this was released after I did my Friday morning video. This is the 15th through the 18th. And the CPC has really bit into their less heat risk central United States and Northeast kind of outlook. And they've kept the heat south and west. This is, like I said on Friday, a very El Nino-like forecast overall. What I do want to point out is also this. The newest update from the European model really backed off on the risk of being drier in this area. It's now significantly lower than what it had been in previous runs. But one of the things we're continuing to watch is, where is the Bermuda High going to be? And so if I take you out here and instead of showing you precipitation, show you a pressure pattern over the next 30 days, I want you to note that their higher pressure still, compared to average, higher farther to the north. What this might mean for tropical systems trying to make the turn before getting to the United States, we need to be continue to watch. But remember, the ocean temperatures in here and along the East Coast are incredibly hot. So that means we do need to be on the lookout in this month of August for tropical systems. One last thing I want to keep an eye on. The Southern Oscillation Index took a bit of a turn over the weekend. And I'll be curious to see if it continues doing this. If it does, if that drops, CPC's forecast for a very El Nino-like August, that's going to verify, I think. So I'll watch this carefully and keep reporting back to you throughout this week. Have a good one. Thanks.